We're off to a really great start building the front end of our application. Now it's time to really fuse together everything that we've been doing, and we're going to make our first query from our front end to our backend data in Strapi. Then we're going to use that data to programmatically create the tabs for our header instead of having to go in and manually define each one. Let's head on over to the code editor to get started. Alright, I'm here in layout.js in our front end folder. Alright, and we had mentioned when we were going over how we were going to work with GraphQL in Gatsby, we talked a little bit about the use static query hook. Okay, and we don't even really need to know that it's a hook right now. That doesn't really matter. Essentially, this is just a function. This is just a function that we can use to let Gatsby know that we want to query some data in GraphQL. Okay, but importantly, this is a static query, so we cannot pass variables into this. Okay, this has to just be a static query, and because this is a static query, this is going to be ran at build time. So when Gatsby is going through and creating the static files for our site, it's going to look for all of these static queries throughout our application, pull them out, execute the queries, and then bake that data that is returned into the static HTML that it creates for us. We're going to go ahead and use the setup that they have here in the layout component, but we're going to swap out the query for a query that we will actually be needing. Okay, so let's flip on over to the browser, and here I'm at localhost 8000. Make sure you of course have both your Strapi and your Gatsby servers running, and I'm at localhost port 8000 /___ graphical. GRAF, and that's graphical spelt like GraphQL, just with an I before the Q. Okay, graphical. This is our graphical GraphQL interface. And it has the query that we had used as an example still loaded up. So I'm going to go ahead and uncheck these boxes and get rid of all of this. All right. And what we're going to do for the tabs up in our application, these are actually just the categories that we have, and then the contact us, but we'll go ahead and tack that on. But this is just the categories that we have in our application, and I think it would be cool if we set this up so that if we went in and added more categories, they would automatically become part of our header without us having to go in and do anything else manually. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our static query to query the list of categories and then use the data returned to create a tab for each one. All right, pretty simple in concept. So we'll go over to the graphical editor, and if we came down to the bottom, you see Strapi category. That would be for one specific category, but we want to come up to all Strapi category so that we can grab multiple. Now, there's kind of a lot of GraphQL that you can get into here, but the most important part, and all you really need to know for working with this, is go into edges and then node. And now here is all the information that you'll want. So we'll grab the name of our Strapi categories and the Strapi ID. All right, so let's go ahead, make sure that's good. Let's execute the query. And you can see here we get hats, hoodies, and shirts, just like we would want up in our tabs. So now take note that we'll need to access this information from the data.allStrapiCategory.edges.node, and actually edges is an array, so we'll either map over this or you would access each one of these objects via index in the array. All right, I'll go ahead and make this screen a bit bigger so hopefully you guys can see that all right. So let's go ahead and copy our query. I'm going to copy that whole query. You see how easy this graphical editor really makes this whole process. So now we just copy the query, we come back over to layout.js, and the general structure here, I'll just go over that, but since it's already here, we'll use it, is you use static query, and then call that as a function, and pass in the GraphQL tag, or function rather, imported from Gatsby. Okay, both of these are destructured out from Gatsby. We'll pass use static query GraphQL, and then a set of backticks. Okay, and then inside that set of backticks, we can paste our query. So from this brace up to the keyword query, paste that in. Now we can go ahead, we can give it a name, but the name doesn't really matter, but let's call it get categories. All right, and now I'm going to go ahead and console.log our data. Let's go ahead and save this. And now if we flip back on over to the browser, we can see we've got some all Strappy category being console logged. So this is coming directly from the static query that is being executed here. We're executing the query from our front end to grab our categories, and then we're logging out the returned response. Okay, and we're saving that to a constant called data. All right, so now if I come in, we see that we've got a property all Strappy category. So it's data.allStrappy category. And then if we open that up, we can see that it's edges. So .edges. Okay, this is the array containing all of our actual categories. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll cut that, our data.allStrappy category.edges. This is a pattern I commonly follow. We'll go ahead and on our header, let's give it a prop categories. And we're going to pass to it our data.allStrappy category.edges. Okay, and specifying all the way down to the .edges makes it really easy to just work with the categories prop in our header as an array without having to worry about all this. All right, so now if we go ahead and save this, we should be able to come over to our header, and the header is now going to receive props, but we can go ahead and destructure out of those props our categories. All right, now if I go ahead and console.log header and then a comma categories, we can save that, flip on over, we'll refresh it. It looks like the zoom is still happening from the graphical, so I'll reset that. And now you can see header and then the array containing our actual categories being console logged now from the header component being passed down from the layout component. All right, so we're making great progress and we've successfully queried our Strappy data from our Material UI Gatsby front end. Let's go ahead and open up the code editor now. And now we can actually use these categories so that we can create our tabs. Instead of listing out a tab one by one like this, we can do it programmatically. All right, so I'm going to create a constant up here, constant of routes. All right, and let's set this equal to an array, and I'm going to spread, so ... categories, and that is going to go inside the categories array and pull out every element and make it an element of this array. Okay, so this is just pulling out everything from categories, and then we're going to add on to that another route. Remember, because we need to tack on our contact us route, because that's not one of our actual categories, but we'd want to clean up our code and use just one call to map over all of our routes to create our tab instead of adding it on later as a second tab component. Okay, so now we'll end up just with one rendered tab for every route that we have. All right, but let's go ahead and we'll add it in the same way that the other categories are structured so that our mapping statement is a lot simpler. Okay, so instead of just saying like contact us as a string here, well then, and when we go through and map through all the categories here, remember what they look like. They have their objects and it has a node property and then node.name or node.strappyid. Okay, so let's follow that same pattern here. Let's make this an object with a node property, and this will be an object with a name property. Let's do contact us, and we'll give it a Strappy ID just so we can use this as an identifier later, and we can just make this whatever we want. I'll even make it a string of contact. All right, so now this will just be really easy for us to map over all the routes and create a tab for it. So we'll come down in our tabs component, and we will use braces to inject some JavaScript in here. And we are going to take all of our routes that now contain our categories plus contact us, and we are going to .map over our routes. And that is going to give us access to each individual route. Okay, and then that'll be an arrow function, and now we can perform an operation for every route. All right, and all we're going to do is return a tab component. So I'm just going to use parentheses to immediately return the inside expression, and we'll simply return one single tab component with the label prop that we know we need. Let's go ahead and close that off, and now we can get rid of all those before, and so now we just have our one tab. All right, but where is this label coming from? Remember, it's going to come from our routes, and now we have the individual route. So this would be here, and this is our route.node. So our label, we'll use JavaScript. So our route.node.name. Our route.node.name will give us our label. And since we're mapping over this, we have to use a special React keyword, the key keyword, and we need to pass it a identifier so that React can tell which tab is which. All right, this just helps it internally keep track of the different dynamic elements we're creating here. So we'll give it a key of our route.node.strappy ID. All right, let's go ahead and save that, flip back on over. We can refresh just to make sure, but you won't see anything different because we've successfully now programmatically added a tab for each of our categories as well as our extra tab for Contact Us. So this is a really powerful pattern. I think this is really cool and really interesting how it's just automatically connected to Strappy. So when you update your categories there, you'll immediately see new tabs in the next build of your project in Gatsby.